Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for your patience. We had a little bit of Europe to US time glitch there, but we're on track now. So thank you. And thank you for joining us. My name is Molly Dubin, and I'm the curator here at the Jewish Museum, Milwaukee. And I am truly thrilled to have our presenter here with us this evening, Elana Shapira, who is going to be talking about highlights in art and politics in Nazi Germany. We will have a Q&A at the end of the program, so please submit your questions for Elana using the chat feature when we come to that portion of the program. Many of you, I believe, who are participating have had a chance to come in and see our new original exhibit, which is called Degenerate, Hitler's War on Modern Art. And of course, we are looking at this unprecedented campaign by the National Socialists, led by Hitler, in terms of his sensibilities, and certainly a bit of anger and probably hurt pride connected to an unprecedented attack on modern art, which then led to a cancellation really of the artists who created the bad artwork, the unsanctioned artwork, those that supported it. And we are going to talk with Elana tonight about what was going on at this time, but really she's going to be able to bring an interesting perspective in that Elana is joining us from Vienna, Austria. And Vienna, of course, the Vienna secession was kind of a precursor to some of the more modernist movements that were deemed degenerate. And there are some really fascinating and disturbing parallels to contemporary events. So I'm going to introduce Elana and let her talk with us about some of her unique insights and some of the things that she has gleaned about this very significant period in time. So Elana is a cultural and design historian. She is a specialist in the study of Viennese modernism. Her research interests include Jews in the creative industries in Europe and in the US, and artistic and avant-garde. Shapira has organized important international symposium and workshops on the subject of Jews and cultural identity in Central European modernism and women designers and architects. She has published widely on design and architecture in transnational contexts, Jewish patronage of modernism, construction of cultural identities, and the relationship between design and society in edited volumes, exhibition catalogs, and leading art and design journals. It is a pleasure to have you here and an honor. Please help me welcome Elana Shapira.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Molly, and thank you very much also for inviting me to give the talk this evening. I'm going to share my screen. So I have dealt with this material of the construction of opposition to modernism. Also throughout my academic work. And I followed also the early exhibitions that were organized by curator Stephanie Barron at the Los Angeles County Museum at the time, many years ago. And it always follows because the word degenerate kept coming up in relation to opposition against modern art, specifically with Nazi politics. And it's true that the Nazis were not the first ones to criticize modern art. But the way they handled it was as part of creating a total worldview about society, about the relationship between individual and society, and about actually suppressing any free thinking or independent thinking in the society. Now, what happened in Germany was in 1933, after the Nazis took over, there was collaborations of second-rate, third-rate artists and politicians and people that have been working from the end of the 1920s, in order to exclude modernist artists and foreign influence of foreign art, especially from France, on German art. They collaborated in order to make sure that the Nazi ideology will be, I would say, the most dominant in society. Now, Hitler promised in 1933, give me 4 years, I will show you what I can achieve. And these 4 years were celebrated in 1937 in an exhibition in Berlin, in which all the dogmatic slogans of the nation is united and unified, strength through joy, all this supposedly, this kind of populist word combinations were promoted, and also the achievements. But it wasn't enough. They needed something more in order to convince the people that they are the people to represent the future of Germany. Parallel in 1937, also the House of German Art was opened in Munich. And it was supposed to represent the superiority of the German race. It was supposed to represent the beauty of the German people, the healthiness, but mostly the idea, the reflection, what are the German people about? And parallel to this exhibition that opened in 1937, a guy called Ziegler, an artist, Adolf Ziegler, received a commission from Goebbels, who was the head of the propaganda ministry. He told him, collect all the degenerate, supposedly identified as degenerate modernist art, send it to Berlin, and we will select 600 or so. He didn't say the number, but we will select some hundreds in order to construct an exhibition parallel to the German art, to the beautiful German art. We will construct it across the street in an archaeology institute, in the ground and first floor, several rooms to represent what is the other side of the beauty and the superiority. What's the others? Who are the enemy of our nation and who are the enemy of our race? And it wasn't a surprise for Ziegler, not for Goebbels, because the idea of shame exhibitions have been traveling around in Germany since a few months after Hitler took power in Germany. There were Bolshevists kind of art that was identified as Bolshevist art, including the most, I would say, acknowledged artists at the time, German and French. So you have like Paul Klee, or you have Pablo Picasso there as part of the idea of defining what's good and what's evil in the German Nazi society. Now, in these art exhibitions, the degenerate art, or the so-called degenerate art, or what they thought that could be identified as degenerate in order to define the enemy, there were several strategies applied in order to convince the people that what they are looking at are really a threat to their sense of beauty, their sense of healthiness, the sense of, I would say, happiness even, because it's the idea of a slogan was that power through joy. And so they had to arrange the paintings in these exhibitions in a way that people will feel disgusted or fear out of them. And so I make sure to try and show you how is the degenerate is really the meaning of the word is the deviation from normality or the deterioration of the race, how it was played out in the German context at the time. So the question is it describing un-German, yeah, or Nazi German value system, or aesthetic sensibilities, or healthy versus sick, or promiscuous versus chaste? And what's foreign? Foreign was really identified as something, especially the French foreign, but not only, the Bolsheviks and the Jews were also part of the foreign as a threat to the society. And the idea was to construct really a binary, like two opposites, the good and the evil, the bad. And if you look at the exhibition that came up in 1937 across the House of German Art, you see paintings, you see photos from it as people like holding their mouths as if, oh, what's going on here? Or kind of looking very closely what's going on in these paintings. But these paintings that were, for example, in this room at the so-called Degenerate art exhibition, you see amazing artists like Lovis Corinth, Ecce Homo, or Lembruch, a sculpture by Lembruch that's called The Kneeling Woman, or Franz Marc, The Blue Horses. Now, if we speak about the construction, it was really a construction, a kind of fighting for a lie. Because if you think what was regarded as accepted, I would say Nazi art at the time, and how women were defined there, like this amazing woman running naked, and compare it to what was chosen as supposedly as degenerate by Wilhelm Lembruch, The Kneeling Woman, we could see that there is no sense of reflection on chastity, femininity, shyness, all the things that supposedly would have been considered in a traditional bourgeoisie society as positive. So the rhetoric that they developed was really an invented rhetoric just to convince the people that they are the representative of the Germans and they should be submissive to their two works of art that we saw in the room, Lovis Corinth and Franz Marc, represent actually some of the things that the Nazi authorities wanted to suppress. With Lovis Corinth, a father of German expressionism, we see him just the year he died, yeah, and fear of death and the sense of being victimized, coming to terms with the Christian, the idea of suffering of Christ. You have Pilat, you have a soldier, you have a whole construction of suffering. And this kind of an emotional expressiveness was something that the Nazis did not want to see in public. This kind of very real pain that he wanted to expose within his coming to terms with his own death. And with Franz Marc, who was influenced by French Fauvism, that referred to the idea of applying color in art in a subjective manner, and him trying to ennoble horses as a kind of, with the blue color and simplify the forms. This is something, again, subjective and coloring, and something that is not illusionistic, is not naturalistic, something that the Nazi authorities or those who constructed this propaganda against modernism would not be accepted. Now, the source for one of the source books for how they would identify modernism, modern art that they would like to brand as degenerate, was a Jewish art historian called Karl Einstein, who praised modernism and promoted avant-garde art in Germany. He was part of a whole group of art historians, Jews and non-Jews, that really made sure to explain this art and show the beauty of it. And I see here, I show here also a portrait of his by another Jewish artist called Anita Ray, and both of them died in the Holocaust. They died not by being murdered, by committing suicide because they couldn't handle. She couldn't be handled by being branded as degenerate in 1933, and he was afraid of being arrested. But the story goes that these people and the modern artists that we will encounter in these exhibitions, it was a collaboration between politicians, populists, and a group of second-hand or traditional, not very, I would say, highly recognized in Germany. So we have the most famous guy, Goebbels, the Reich Minister for Propaganda. We have the theorist Alfred Rosenberg, who also was the editor of the Volkschaft Beobachter. He also wrote the book, The Myth of the 20th Century. So these are the politicians in the area. Then you have the free artists and architects, second-rate, unaccepted, mostly by the modernist museums at the time, Wolfgang Willrich and Adolf Ziegler and Paul Schulze-Naumburg. Now, it's not that they always accepted each other's opinions, but the idea was not to have your own personal opinion. The idea was to construct a totalitarian worldview in which people that you wanted to exclude from the society, the weak members of society, feminists, for example, or Jews as a minority for sure, and also people with disabilities or in different kinds of disabilities. This was the aim, to create a kind of a race that would be superior above all otherness and unified with it. Now, why am I bringing this painting by Hermann Otto Heuer? Is just to show you what does it mean to try to create a totalitarian worldview. You have the leader in a classical gesture that you will see him at the time also in films, in parades, this kind of preaching. And you have the followers and people that look at him without any second thought that he is not to be followed blindly. Now, the tactic that they used in order to brand modernism as unacceptable was actually brought up in publications before Hitler came to power. For example, the book by Paul Schulze-Naumburg, the architect, who wrote Art and Race in 1928, in which the idea of the superiority of the race, of the Aryan race, would be compared to other kind of degenerate. And he brought in Schmidt-Rotterdam and Modigliani and others and compared them to sick people in society or people with disabilities. And you could see this, the architect himself was not something of a modernist, it was a rather a rural type of architecture. And the idea was really to place the two together. The beautiful German, superior, supposedly beautiful, and the modernist. And to show the difference between them, to try and reconstruct a kind of a nationalist, I would say, religious, but not their kind of a religion, of a cult against around the leader, Adolf Hitler. And the two paintings that are compared here, Picasso, the Cubist Picasso for 1909, a very early one piece by Pablo Picasso, why would they be challenged by the Cubism? Why would they be challenged by Modigliani, the portrait of a young man? Why would they fall that would be considered as a threat? So Picasso himself defined Cubism or used Cubism in order to show different views at the same time. At the same time, you have a picture of a woman, of his lover, actually, Fernande, that was made in Spain in different perspectives, one next to another. And it resulted in fragmentation and abstraction of the image of a woman. And this possibility that an art could show you different angles of the same person was a threat, because it showed you a complexity of reality at the time. And with Modigliani, it has a different story behind it. With Modigliani, it was really about the woman having an intimate moment with herself and showing herself in a kind of a position of touching herself, allowing herself to be kind of a circle introspective. These moments of intimacy and this possibility to show the complexity of reality was something that was completely against this flat, easy to understand worldview that the Nazis wanted to offer. Now, Wolfgang Wilrich, the other artist I referred to, he spoke about the cleansing of the art temples. He showed he published a book. And he also was one, together with Sittler, who also went one museum after another, and selected the degenerate arts in order to bring them to the Shame exhibitions and later on to the Degenerate art exhibition in Munich. Now you could see here from this collage that he arranged with different women by Nolde and other artists at the time, that he tried to make it such a kind of dehumanization with a kind of a chimpanzee look, or he made sure to try and make a chaos and a sense of horror-vaki that people could not really identify what's going on in what picture. Now, for him, really the idea of the ethos of manhood, as you see here, with Hitlerjugend should become an officer in 1943, this was for him the ideal of the German race. Now, again, the idea was, if you look at the comparison of this artist who served the Nazi ideology, Wilrich, and you compare it to Otto Dix from the New Objectivity German artist, and how they dealt, because in the background of Nazi rise to power, you have the loss of First World War. Now, First World War created a huge crisis in the German society. First, because many soldiers came back with shell shock. Many came back wounded and different, lost legs, lost eyes. It was a horror show of a group, and it was all around the cities, and it was difficult to hide it. And so you have both of them, Otto Dix and Wilrich, handling the traumas of World War I, but you could see one is really playing around with the old man and death, and he looks like a kind of completely out of reality test, something that is far away from anything that would have really happened at the time. It was more of an allegory of the fighter and death. While Otto Dix, in order to make sure that the society will not feel any attraction to militarism or any need to start a war again after the Versailles Treaty that was signed in the 1920s, he made sure to show them what was going on actually in the protest that came out, that with the soldiers that. And this reality test for the Nazis was something that they really wanted to suppress as part of the sense of humiliation, recognizing that they were defeated, that they initiated the war, that they could not win. And so this together was part of the lies that the Nazis wanted to secure would be. Now you could see in a reference to the guide for the exhibition of Degenerate art that the painting by Dix was identified as a painted defense sabotage, that they were just couldn't handle it. Now, as I said, leading to the Degenerate art exhibition, there was different exhibitions that were traveling around Germany from 1934 to 1937. One of the main artists that was identified as a so-called degenerate was Paul Klee, a Swiss artist that was very popular actually in Germany among museums and art historians, and among most of the those who favored visiting to art museums. And the Nazis could not handle his perspective, this childish perspective, this ability to claim freedom through painting in a childish manner, or applying colors that were not supposed to be like brown or so, or I would say yellow to houses that looked differently. They couldn't like the challenge, they couldn't challenge the idea of the perspective of an artist that could be subjective with a sense of, I think, freedom of creativity. Now, one thing that happened with the Degenerate art exhibition, that they were always accompanied with newspapers, articles, and it's actually explaining to people what are they defining as good and evil, what's supposed to be the good German art and the bad, negative one. So you have, of course, Dix, and you have another painting by Klee called Around the Fish. And you look at it and you think, what was so challenging about it? Why was it so difficult for the Nazis to accept the alternative way of seeing, beside the fact that they wanted to suppress free thinking? So you have Paul Klee really coming around with a kind of a classic, the fish miracle of Christ. And he opens it up to all sorts of discussions about coming to terms with religion, actually, very honest, very open-minded. He refers to the alchemist, like what does it mean a miracle? A miracle, maybe there was an alchemy working in it. What does it mean in regard to fear? You know, the idea of sense of fear that could be involved in all sorts of aspects to reality that made you think about the complexity. This is art at its best, allowing you to open up or challenge you to think about your experience in your life and your now. This is a statement that was about Paul Klee by an art historian. And here is the citation, and you could see what was going on in the heads when we tried to suppress the possibilities of thinking differently. The fact that Paul Klee could have once been considered a great artist will be for future generations one of the clearest examples of the complete spiritual decay of the individualist cultural epoch. Things that could only excite the laughing muscles, like the insane childish strolling of the Klee, were touted as the of creative sensibility. It is prelude of historical significance in terms of cultural policy that the next generation of German artists has been freed from these seducers who are alien to the race. And at the same time, I bring a painting by the guy who was a teacher of this art historian, and you could see these two worldviews, the one that allowed you the freedom of thinking of reflecting, of coming in with experiences of intimacy, of challenge, of fear, of reality test, and the idea of the adoration of the leader, this blind following of the dictator. One thing that I thought about in regard to the Degenerate art exhibition that opened in 1937, there was a room called The Mockery of Christ. And this is very interesting because there was a competition between Nazism as a religion and the actual religion that was the majority religion at the time in Germany, the Christianity, the Protestant. Most of the people, even though there was a process of secularization, many of the people were believers. And the question for me was the choice that they brought into this room that was identified with images that mocked Christ. So you have one that was taken actually from a cathedral called by a sculpture by Ludwig Kiss called the Crucified Christ. Then you had Max Beckmann painting that I show you here, The Descent from the Cross from 1917. You have several Nordic paintings also around it. Now, for sure, the priests that worked at the cathedral and allowed this to had no problems with it. I think the room that showed these elements of very individualistic coming to terms with the Christian religion at the time, it was a threat because it showed you that the religion itself, the Christianity, within the frame of the institute, allowed at least those progressive among them a more individualist subjective coming to terms with the myths of Christianity, of the idea of Christ on the cross, or the idea of him removed from the cross. And this is something that the Nazi authorities could not handle, the idea that someone would develop a personal approach to a certain religious experience. And so this is something that was considered as un-German. And Max Beckmann is one of the, like Paul Klee, like Otto, like Dix. These are the German artists that were mostly, but they were speaking about hundreds of paintings and drawings that were branded as degenerate and were removed from museums and placed in degenerate art exhibitions. Now, what Beckmann, each one of these people, like the artists, the German artists that were branded as degenerate, they had their own trauma during World War I, like Lehmbruck and Max Beckmann were healthcare helpers at the war. And they entered a huge crisis, mental crisis afterwards. So a lot of their emotional distress and the sense of hardships were also represented in their art. Now, after Ziegler and Willrich went through 32 museums or so, and collected hundreds of paintings. They sent them to Berlin in 1937. No, 37, just before they opened the large exhibition in Munich, the Degenerate Art Exhibition. And among these paintings that were collected, we could see a painting of The Sleeping Drinker by Pablo Picasso from the Blue period. We could see a Fauve artist, André Derain from Valley of the Lord of the Earth. And it's very interesting in regard, especially for The Sleeping Drinker, because if you look at Nazi art, you will never confront poverty and the pains of social poverty. This was another lie that the Nazi authorities were promoting through this fight against artists that exposed the harsh realities, social realities, that you didn't have it. You had farmers and you had bourgeoisie, but you didn't have the social class and the pains of having no money, because this was a period during the 1920s in which poverty was really one of the most problems, the biggest problems in the German society. So if they condemned Picasso Sleeping Drinker as a degenerate art, it was partly because, not only because of the expressive and the emotional and the brilliance of the artist, but it was also the idea that how can he confront us with images of poverty and the pains that accompany it? So it wasn't only the soldiers that they didn't, the wounded soldiers and the pains that accompanied those who survived World War I and returned to Germany, but also the idea of poverty. This was the kind of creating of a false reality through art and condemning every art that would show a different perspective. So there were two phases of collecting degenerate art in museums. The first one was before the exhibition in Munich in 1937, in which they went through 32 collections in 23 cities and basically confiscated 16,000 paintings, drawings, and sculptures. Among those, they sent to the Degenerate Art exhibition was 650. There was a second phase after the exhibition in Munich in 1937, in which they collected also some thousands and of paintings and confiscated them and sent all of them to Berlin. Now, here are the lists of the paintings that are found in Victoria and Albert Museum. And you could see the city and what museum and how many paintings. It was very, very well documented what exactly they are taking out. Now, here, if you look at another list from the same, you could see here a V, a T, and an X. This is about the fate of the confiscated artworks. So V would be verkauf, that it was sold. T would be that it was tausch, that it was exchanged for other works of art that they wanted. And X would be that they were destroyed. So whatever they could sell or could exchange, they simply did it without it. They didn't have any promise and benefit from it. 5,000 works were left in Berlin, then were taken to the fire department and set on fire. So 5,000 are still assumed to have been destroyed in the fire. One of these paintings that was destroyed was by Max Ernst, the surrealist artist, that I will come back to him later on in my discussion. And showing the beautiful gardener. But before I come up to other paintings that were confiscated, I want to try and show you what kind of strategy was there in order to kind of create a mental shortcuts in which people will really be convinced that the complexity of modernism or the perspectives of individual subjective artists would be a threat to the lifestyle or to what they considered or what they were supposed to be considering as normal. So there were a lot of statements saying stupidity or impudence or both taken to the extreme. And then they would quote something, a valuable confession. And there was a quote supposedly from a journal, Die Aktion, who was one of the avant-gardist journals. We can bluff like the most experienced poker players. We act as if we were painters, poets, and whatever. But what we are is simply an ecstatically impudent. In our impudence, we take the road, a ride, and train snubs to lick our boots at pass. We raise the wind, raise the storm with our impudence. So it was ideas if, these are the people who challenge our values of respectability, supposedly the one that we would like to keep worldview intact. So we didn't have only Pablo Picasso or Derain as a French representative of modernism that were praised during the 1920s in Germany. Also, another painting that was destroyed was by the French Jan Metzinger. And you could see again how the Cubist analysis of a figure with an umbrella, a woman with an umbrella in a ship, and about this ability to show different views of the same experience from different perspectives and how being fragmented, what it would mean for the Nazi worldview of a simple, easy to read, to follow picture language. Also, Piet Mondrian was identified as a threat to the German art sensibilities or aesthetic sensibilities. Why? Because they couldn't figure out what was going in the dynamic of the horizontal and the vertical lines. They didn't figure that it could have anything to do with a certain sense of aesthetics. For them, it was too challenging. Now, there was a movie made by an American director in connection with the Degenerate art exhibition. It's a 10 minutes clip, and it showed you, it's very interesting, he was an American, he wasn't a German, and still he depicts a lot of what the Germans thought identified as the positive element in society. It really showed you the farmers and the beautiful protagonists. And then when it entered the exhibition of the Degenerate art, of course, you have the facade of the German Art House and the entrance to the Archaeological Institute where the Degenerate art exhibition took place. You have the GIS, that was really like, there was a focus showing all the elements that could have aroused fear and danger. And there was a sculpture also by an artist that was focused on working class people, and the working class people that could, if they had any health problems, could not handle it. And this is again something that would have been a problem for the Nazis to come to terms with. Now, here you have the ways that they arranged it was so claustrophobic that you didn't have the possibility even to distance and reflect what was actually going on in the painting. It was supposed to overwhelm you in a way that you stop thinking. One of the walls, there were 7 rooms in this in the first floor, was the Dada wall. The Dada wall was really the one that was supposed to be like a kind of a fun looking, and it refers to the Dada art movement in Germany at the end of World War I, which was really an affront against the militarism, chauvinism, an attempt to challenge I think the bourgeoisie values as a kind of coming to terms with a combination, this association between capitalism and militarization that they didn't like. In this rooms, one is room number 3, one was, you had different paintings, but you had also guided tours, like that guided tours that will show you. This is a reference to Campendonk, the jumping horse, and that will explain to you what was going on or why these paintings should be definitely rejected. Now, you have here a kind of a statement that was said at the opening of the exhibition by Adolf Ziegler, the second-rate or third-rate artist that was organizing the confiscation and the exhibition itself. And you could see how he pushes the buttons there that will show you the shock and disgust, the sickness and degeneracy, the crimes, everything that they wanted to brand as something that should be excluded from the beautiful, superior, healthy, supposedly healthy Nazi German society. And this is the Dada exhibition from 1920s, and you could see how they refer to it also as a kind of a, it was more of an anti-bourgeoisie provocation at the time. Now, in relation to Beckmann, one of the most popular artists that was confiscated at the time, you have really a kind of a personal, I think, a statement about Joy de Vivre, about how he experienced it. It was in Italy, it was his girlfriend, his friends, and this is something, a kind of a relationship that we could never have accepted as part of the worldview. Other images are from Ernst Ludwig Kirchner, and one of the German expressionists, who 770 works of his were confiscated at the time during this period. And you have, again, things that they couldn't have handled in regard to the city life, the promiscuity in the city life, and all the funds, the color, the striking color, the very challenging perspective in it, the relationship between men and women, the flirtatious things that would not have been accepted as a kind of a supposedly better moral. Also the coloring, the beautiful coloring and the naivety of the paintings of Kampenbeck and Mark were a challenge to the German Nazi aesthetic sensitivities. It's not, I mean, you will never find a goat in red, you will never find a goat in purple, or the idea of the identification with the animals and being one with the animals. This is something that they would not have been accepted. Now, Kandinsky was another artist that was a partner of Franz Marc in the founding of the Blue Rider. And you could see from his letter to Galka Shire, who was a Jewish art dealer that was lucky enough to flee to Los Angeles and managed to represent Kandinsky and other German modernists as an art dealer there, about how he figured out what was going on and his danger and this immediate threat. The Führer recently said that the artists are either swindlers, money, in that case they belong in prison, or overly convinced fanatics, ideal, in that case they belong in a mental asylum. So there was a sense of the artists that they knew what was going on and that there was an immediate threat to their own lives or careers. And so he was lucky enough to flee on time. And when they presented his work, the Zweiler wrote the two kinds of red. They always make sure to note the price that was paid for it as a kind of what's the authorities at the time, what's the museum director were wasting the money, because money was also an issue in regard to the waste that were involved in modernism. Now, the concepts of women and the role of women in society, you could compare Max Ernst and his surrealist painting of the beautiful God now, the creation of Eve, and the figure of, and the citation from Goebbels about what woman is supposed to be. The mission of a woman is to be beautiful. The female bird pretties herself for her mate and hatches the eggs for him. In exchange, the mate takes care of gathering the food, stands guard and wards of the enemy. So it's a classical gender role society, very primitive in a way, in its own way. And if you look at Max Ernst, and you have this beautiful God, now you have her, the bird being symbolized in both the penis and the breast, according to psychoanalytic interpretation. You have the Maori warrior behind her, which is also as a kind of coming to terms with dreams and irrationality and this unconscious, everything that an individual would have faced in his life, and at the same time, the Nazis could not have allowed it to be open, publicly discussed. The same it goes for people who identified with minority groups like the expressionist artist Otto Muller, who believed that his ancestors came from Romani, from the Gypsies. In this, and he actually depicted several members of the Romani community. This is something that could not have been appropriate in a superior race that thought that Romani was a degenerate group of people. Now, comparing both Muller, Kirchner, and Max Ernst to what was identified as the proper German art by Adolf Ziegler, you could see that the statement of Goebbels that the role of women was to be supposedly beautiful, because that was all of everything she had to be. It's nothing to be explored, nothing, not about her sexuality, not about her selectivity, not about her professionality, not about her own character, but rather to be exhibited herself as part of the German Nazi Weltanschauung, of the worldview. One thing that the Nazis could not have handled at all was the idea of psychology, or the idea of fear, the idea of sense of victimization, coming to terms with religion in different manners. Oskar Kokoschka, 630 paintings of his were removed from German museums. He was one of the representatives of the psychology and the birth of psychoanalysis in Vienna. He was very much influenced by trends. And he, and this is something, this sense of, I think, exploring your own psyche, something that we couldn't have handled. And this is a self-portrait, his reaction to the fact that he was identified as a degenerate artist. This is in Scotland these days. And you could see, as Kandinsky said, that he's aware of being branded as a degenerate and the threats that he portrays himself as with hands that are being like tied together, and you have the deer here, and you have a man escaping, and the sense of being persecuted very strongly. And here you could see what was the fate of some of the paintings of Kokoschka. The Jewish artists that were presented in the Degenerate Art exhibition, Otto Freundlich, he died in concentration camp. All of them were part of the modernist scene in Germany before the Nazis took over. All of them were highly recognized. All of them were part of different movements that were promoting, I would say, a social utopia, or an attempt to refer to improvement of society. This is a quote by him: "I fight for the liberation of people and things from the habits and ownership." But it's all about the idea of expressing an individual perspective on life. And this is how it was defamed, how they were working. Then you have Chagall and Purim in the Village. Again, this reflection about the possibility of metaphorical contact of dream world, of the Eastern Jewish culture that was completely upset. Or Yankel Adler and the two women that are far away from an attempt to beautify them, to standardize woman. Then you have the emotional expression of the expressionist of the kind of a very sense of heightened sensitivity of Ludwig Meidner. And you have the coming to terms with the intelligent wanderers, and Wollheim, an abstract, one more abstract. I'm trying to show through these different examples that there was an attempt to create a society that would be submissive and that would follow blindly the leader, the dictator. It wasn't a place for individualism, there wasn't a place for subjectivity, for showing in one painting different views or different perspectives, or to challenge the person by showing the complexity of reality, or confronting him with the realities test, what's actually going on with the soldiers, or poverty in society. This was a kind of a fictional world that they were creating with a lot of hatred for authority in order to establish something that is what is total good and total bad in society. And I compare it to the Afghanistan Taliban destruction of the Goodhart sculpture in 2007, I think it was 2007, and to the destruction of Max Ernst, the creation of Eve, or the beautiful garden, in order to show you the challenges that we face today, even in societies that want to suppress the freedom of thinking, of independence, to undermine the equality between the genders, the rights of minority groups, and art in many ways, and handling art and the public discourse that is connected with this art is something that totalitarian or reactionary or fascist societies cannot allow itself. And this is something that we should definitely be able to fight against in our days today. So thank you very much.
All right, Elana, if you wouldn't mind stopping sharing your screen.
Okay.
And then we'll come back over to, let's see.
Okay.
Side by side here. And well, that's all right.
I did stop, right? Oh no.
You're still seeing it, but it's first of all, I just want to thank you for that incredible talk. You covered so much ground in such a short period of time. And I know, we talked back and forth. It was a tall order, and particularly since you're joining us kind of literally in the middle of the night for you, can't thank you enough for being with us and sharing your knowledge. So we have some questions here from our audience, and one I want to pose to you. You spoke a little bit about in speaking to some of the rooms at the Entartet Kunst exhibit, and some of the themes or slogans that were written on the walls, and some of the things that were what made them particularly offensive. And one of those things really has to do with women, the depiction of women, what was kind of happening with women during the Weimar Republic. So there was a bit of more of an emancipation going on, and that was certainly a threat to the National Socialists. So the question here is, were women artists included indiscriminately as threats if they were creating similar modernist art? And did the Nazis exhibit their work and deride their work in different ways than they did the male artists? And I pose that because I was actually asked a question at another program we had about female artists. So you, of course, mentioned Anita Ray, but
yeah.
Can you speak to this question a little bit?
So Anita Ray was not actually exhibited in Degenerate, and most of the artists that, as far as I know, in the Degenerate exhibitions were men artists. Paula Modersohn-Becker, I assume, was also identified, and there were many women identified. As far as I noticed in the exhibitions, most of them were men. I don't think women were differently. Women did make careers in Nazi Germany. You have Leni Riefenstahl. You have very famous women architects who made amazing careers. And you have, so I don't think that they were excluded per se, as long as they participated with the Nazi machinery of creating ideology. I mean, the Leni Riefenstahl and the architects that worked for Nazi authorities, they all participated. So it wasn't women themselves, it was women who negotiated, who were willing to, I think, the modernist women who wanted to express their subjectivity or their fears or the more, I would say, human, menschlich, representative of that were. I don't think that they were excluded from the Nazi cultural production woman. It was the modernist woman. I didn't count the woman artists in the exhibition of the Degenerate in 1937, and as far as I remember, also the earlier ones, the most were men. But women modernists that were like red, that were identified as degenerate, would not have could not have presented the work in public.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. Wow. Thank you for that additional insight.
Yeah. I didn't mention the fact that what happened to the artists. I referred to Epstein, but for example, Dix remained in Germany. Meitner remained until the last minute. There were several degenerate artists that were really excluded and defamed that remained in Germany, and they weren't touched. They went kind of an inner immigration. But many could not handle the way they were treated, the degenerate stamp, and committed suicide.
Like Kirchner. Yeah. Yeah. Their fates, yes, ranged, and that is kind of the worst, of the examples of how this labeling and tying of artistic sense of, artistic thought and creation really impacted these artists. And of course, as you mentioned earlier, those who were already so many traumatized, who had fought in World War I and who were trying to, cope with those feelings. So I would like to ask, just because being that you're from Vienna and such a kind of a interesting connection here, we don't really get into talking about the Vienna secession a lot in our exhibit, but we certainly, talk about the modernist movements and the impact and inspiration and discussions that were going on between these artists, who many shared, common ideologies, beliefs, sensibilities. So someone like Klimt, who, was eventually, he became president or head of the Vienna secession when they really kind of broke off into just an artistic group. And just that it was such, it's talked about as a movement that was fairly brief, but so radical and long lasting in its impact. It had such this immense impact. Can you speak to that just a little bit?
Yeah. So with Klimt is a very good example how different were the Nazi ideologies. Like so Klimt had an amazing, huge exhibition. Klimt died in 1918 from Spanish influenza. He was the head of the secession. He's known for the Kiss and Adela Bloch-Bauer. He had many Jewish patrons. Galia Bloch-Bauer, Lederer, the main industrialists of sugar and bankers and in Vienna. And yet he had by a guy who was responsible actually for the death of 65,000 Jews who sent them to the concentration camps. He supported a huge grand exhibition of Klimt 1943 in Vienna. And the portrait of Adela Bloch-Bauer was not identified as Adela Bloch-Bauer, as the Jewish woman who was one of his main clients, but as the woman in gold, the painting that is now in the Gallery. So I suspect that the secessionist artists that did not engage with psychology and could have been identified as decorative and beautiful women, look that appear like queens and aristocrats, that the Nazi authorities, at least in Vienna, who wanted to promote the city as the city of culture, would not have a problem with it.
Mm.
Well, other images of Kokoschka and Schiller that did come to terms with their sexuality and the psychological understanding, they would have had a huge problem in showing them at the time.
It's so,
yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I, yes, appreciate your, of course, speaking to the portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer, who, of course, it's known by its name really as the woman in gold, the lady in gold. And of course, there was an entire film made about that, which really gets into looking at what has happened in the decades since so many of these pieces were confiscated, and what is happening in terms of some of the heirs of the original owners trying to repatriate these pieces.
In Vienna, you have something. The situation in Vienna was really interesting because many artists who actually were part of Viennese modernism. You can't identify Viennese modernism without the Jewish clientele and without the Jewish journalists and the art critics. They were the makers and shapers of the Viennese modernism. People like Peter Tugendhat and Ludwig Heverschi were the two main critics and mechanics of the secession. And you had the Lederer family and Bloch-Bauer and many others that were very prominent and actually sponsored it, the Wittgenstein family, the Secession House. And yet people who worked with them, like Karl Moll, one of the artists, he actually helped the Nazis enter the homes of Jews that fled and confiscate modern art, supposedly in order to save it for Austria, but actually contributing to the fact that these people entered a huge crisis. Besides stealing, the issue of stealing, those who needed the paintings in order to survive or to sell them entered the problem. So the secession movement in Vienna, in many ways, by the way, it's also happened in Germany with the Jewish gallerists that were persecuted by the Nazis, like many of them at the time. There was a kind of a sense of betrayal of the Jews who supported the modernism by those who cooperated with them before.
Right. Well, this is such a layered topic, and so many, things to discuss. And I wish we had several more hours to talk about, even just, to dive deeper into the Vienna secession, or, the fact that, Hitler was twice rejected from the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts, and likely, at a time that really correlated with, the great, celebration of work of like Klimt and people like Kokoschka coming on, coming into their own, sense of correlation there. So there's, there are a lot of ironies and paradoxes, and particularly too, when we talk about, we didn't really get into talking about Nolde, who, of course, who
wanted to join the Nazi party,
who was a National Socialist from the get-go, but Goebbels didn't succeed in convincing Hitler that there should be a Nordic expressionist sect. So the irony that he was this great supporter of the Nazis and winds up having, I believe, the most pieces by any one artist included. In the Degenerate art show. So
nobody has any questions from those who heard or it was too many of them.
I think everyone is, maybe they're just soaking it all in. There just was so much to go on there. So So I
Okay.
want to thank you so much. This was such an incredible talk, and for lending your insights as well. I want to just mention a couple of other things that we've got coming up in connection with the Degenerate Art exhibit. We have our next virtual Global Museum Passport program, Holocaust and Resistance, on Tuesday, March 21st at noon. That is on, it's virtual, so yes, via Zoom. And there we will be exploring some of the stories of photographer Roman Vishniak, artists like Claude Cahun and Marcel Moore. And we will also be looking at the story of puppeteers Mike and Frank Osnowitz from the Contemporary Jewish Museum's 2022 exhibition, Oz is for Osnowitz, a puppet family's history, which is really going to look at the Holocaust through art and personal narratives and making contemporary connections to fighting anti-Semitism and hate today. And speaking to other parallels, we have a great program on Thursday, March 30th, 7 p.m. This is an in-person event called Censor, Cancel, Condemn on the front lines of the book ban wars. So again, going to be looking at waves of censorship emerging in school districts and libraries across the countries. And we'll be hearing from a number of panelists who are part of communities who have marginalized voices connected with some of these books that are being banned, or, you know, from educational stories that are being kept from schools. So a lot to get into. If you have not seen Degenerate, the Hitler's War on Modern Art, please come and check us out. You can purchase tickets online or come and see us in person. And again, we've got a great slate of programs beyond what I just mentioned. So please take a look at our website, and we hope that you will participate. Dr. Shapira, thank you again for really waking up in the middle of the night to be here with us and share your insights. And I know I'm going to guess a lot of people in attendance are going to look deeper into Vienna secession and you know, some of the specific artworks that you shared with us here today. So thank you. Have a great rest of your day. And to everyone else, have a great rest of your evening. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.